As I lay shivering in the hospital bed after my third round of chemotherapy, I received the court summons. My in-laws were suing for custody of my children, claiming I was physically and mentally unfit to be their mother. That same evening, my old commanding officer arrived with a sealed envelope. "Your grandfather made me promise to deliver this if you ever face true adversity," he said, handing me documents to a $78 million trust fund no one knew existed. When I walked into my father-in-law's company headquarters 1 month later and placed the acquisition paperwork on his desk, the look of disbelief on his face made every moment of my military and cancer battle worth it. I still remember the exact shade of institutional green on the hospital walls that morning. The kind of sickly, faded color that seems designed to drain hope from anyone who stares at it too long. I'd been staring at it for 4 hours as the chemotherapy drugs dripped steadily into my veins, my body alternating between fire and ice as the medicine designed to save me first had to nearly destroy me. The oncology ward at Veterans Memorial Hospital was quiet that Tuesday morning. Just the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum and the steady electronic hum of medical equipment. I'd chosen this hospital specifically because of their specialized program for female veterans, women like me, who had served their country and now found themselves fighting entirely different battles on home soil. My phone vibrated against the thin blanket covering my legs. A text from my neighbor, Rita. "There's someone at your door with official looking. Paperwork. Should I tell them to come back?" I frowned, typing a slow response with fingers that felt numb and foreign. "Who is it?" "Process server. Says he needs to deliver court documents." The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the chemotherapy. I knew exactly what those papers were. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had been explicit during her last wellness check at my home 3 days ago. "You can barely get out of bed. Sarah," she'd said, her voice dripping with practiced concern while her eyes remained cold and calculating. "The children need stability. Richard would have wanted us to step in." Richard, my husband, their son, had been gone for 18 months. An IED on his third deployment had taken him from us, leaving me to raise our 2 children, Lily and James, alone. I'd been managing just fine until the diagnosis 4 months ago. Stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive, requiring immediate treatment. "Tell them I'll be home by 3, I texted Rita. "If they won't wait, you can accept it." My treatment session ended at 12:30. The drive home took 40 minutes, each bump in the road sending waves of nausea through my depleted body. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen counter, innocuous-looking, yet ominous. Inside was exactly what I'd feared: a petition for emergency custody filed by Richard's parents, Eleanor and Thomas Wells. They cited my deteriorating health, inability to maintain household responsibilities, and most painfully, emotional instability affecting the children's well-being. They requested an emergency hearing in 7 days. I sank into a kitchen chair, the room spinning around me from both the chemotherapy and the shock. The Wells had been pushing for more involvement since Richard's death, but I'd maintained boundaries, knowing how controlling they had been with him. Richard had joined the military partly to escape their suffocating influence, something they conveniently forgot when portraying him as the perfect son in their social circles. "Mom? Are you okay?" Lily's voice came from the doorway. At 14, she'd become perceptive beyond her years, shouldering responsibilities no child her age should have to bear. I quickly folded the papers and forced a smile. "Just tired from treatment, sweetie. How was school?" "Fine." She set her backpack down, eyes lingering on the envelope. "Is that from the hospital?" "Just some paperwork." I slipped it into a drawer. "Where's your brother?" "Soccer practice. Mrs. Henderson is bringing him home at 5. Our neighbors had been invaluable during my treatment, organizing a meal train, helping with school pickups, and checking in regularly. The community I'd built in the 6 years since we'd moved to this small town after my military retirement had become our lifeline. "Homework?" I asked, trying to maintain normalcy. Lily nodded, heading upstairs to her room. Once alone, I reopened the custody petition, nausea rising as I read the detailed accounts of my supposed failures as a mother. They'd been collecting evidence. Days the children had been late to school, times when meals had been provided by neighbors instead of me, James's falling grades in math. The petition painted me as a mother collapsing under the strain of single parenthood and illness, unable to provide the structure and support two growing children needed. It conveniently omitted how I'd maintained my role as mother through 20 months of grief, while also managing the household finances, attending every school event possible, and only accepting help when absolutely necessary. My phone rang. My friend and fellow veteran Kate, who also happened to be a family attorney. "Rita called me," she said without preamble. "Tell me they didn't." They did. Emergency custody hearing next Thursday. Kate's sigh carried through the phone. "Those vultures have been circling since Richard died. This is low, even for them. They've been documenting everything, Kate. Every time I've needed help. Every school pickup. Every meal delivery. That doesn't make you an unfit mother. It makes you someone fighting cancer with a support system. We'll fight this." "With what resources?" My voice cracked. "The medical bills are draining everything, even with my veterans' benefits. I can't afford a protracted legal battle with them." Thomas Wells owned Wells Development, one of the largest commercial real estate companies in the state. They had resources I couldn't begin to match. "We'll figure it out," Kate said firmly. "Come to my office tomorrow. Bring every piece of documentation you have. Medical records, school communications, anything showing you're managing the children's care appropriately despite your illness." After hanging up, I leaned against the kitchen counter, my body feeling impossibly heavy. The chemotherapy side effects were intensifying. The bone-deep fatigue, the nausea, the fog that made simple thoughts feel like wading through mud. And now this. The truth that I hadn't admitted to anyone, not even Kate, was that some small part of me wondered if the Wells were right. Was I being selfish, insisting on keeping the children with me through this illness? Would they be better off with their grandparents' wealth and stability while I focused on survival? The doorbell rang, interrupting my spiral of doubt. Through the peephole, I saw Colonel Frank Martinez, my former commanding officer from my final deployment. We'd stayed in loose contact over the years, but his appearance at my door was unexpected. "Colonel," I said, opening the door. "This is a surprise." "Major," he replied, still using my military rank, though I'd been retired for years. "May I come in?" He looked the same as he had 5 years ago. Ramrod straight posture, salt and pepper haircut, military short, eyes that missed nothing. He followed me to the living room, declining my offer of coffee. "I heard about your diagnosis," he said. "Military family keeps tabs on each other." I nodded, too tired to question how he knew. "It's been challenging, but I'm fighting. That's why I'm here." He reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope, thick and official-looking with a law firm's name embossed on the front. "Your grandfather asked me to deliver this if you ever faced true adversity." I stared at the envelope in confusion. "My grandfather? He died when I was in high school." "Samuel Reeves was more than just your mother's father," Colonel Martinez said. "Before he built his shipping business, he served with distinction in Vietnam. We met years later at a veterans event when you were just starting your military career." I took the envelope, its weight substantial in my hands. "I don't understand. Why would he give you something to hold for me?" "Samuel was a man who planned for contingencies. He said you reminded him of himself, stubborn, independent, unlikely to accept help unless absolutely necessary." The colonel's expression softened slightly. "He made me promise to wait until you truly needed what's inside. From what I've heard, that time is now." My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal and removed the contents. Legal documents, account statements, and a handwritten letter dated 15 years earlier, just months before my grandfather's death. The letter began simply, Sarah, if you're reading this, you're facing a battle that seems unwinnable. I've prepared resources to help turn the tide. What followed was explanation of a trust fund my grandfather had established, unknown to our family. He'd quietly built his shipping company into a regional powerhouse, then sold it before his terminal cancer diagnosis. Instead of dividing all, the proceeds among his children as everyone believed, he'd set aside a significant portion in a trust for me, his only grandchild who had followed him into military service. The trust had been actively managed by his longtime attorneys, growing substantially over 15 years. The current value, $78 million. Your mother never appreciated the value of financial independence, my grandfather wrote. She married your father believing his family wealth would sustain them, only to be cut off when they disapproved of their marriage. I watched her struggle after the divorce, too proud to ask for help, too unprepared to create stability on her own. I vowed my granddaughter would never face such vulnerability. I looked up at Colonel Martinez, who sat patiently as I processed this information. This can't be real. It's very real, he confirmed. I've stayed in contact with the trust managers over the years. The fund was structured to activate under specific circumstances: your retirement from military service, a medical crisis, or if you requested it directly through me. Why didn't you tell me when I retired? Or when Richard died? Those were your grandfather's explicit instructions. He believed inherited wealth often weakens people if received before they've built their own strength and identity. He wanted you to make your own way, but have protection if true hardship struck. I stared at the account statements, the numbers blurring before my eyes. The amount was staggering. Enough to pay my medical bills many times over. Enough to secure my children's future, regardless of my prognosis. Enough to fight my in-laws' custody petition with the best legal representation available. The trustees are ready to transfer control to you immediately, Colonel Martinez said. Samuel was adamant that when the time came, the resources would be completely at your discretion, with no restrictions. As the reality began to sink in, the doorbell rang again. Through the window, I saw James being dropped off from soccer practice, his small figure dwarfed by his equipment bag. My son, Richard's son, with his father's determined expression and my stubbornness. I need to get that, I said to the colonel. It's my son. He nodded. I'll see myself out the back. The attorney's contact information is in those papers. Call them tomorrow. At the kitchen door, he paused. Major, your grandfather believed in your strength long before you discovered it yourself. Remember that. As James bounded in, excited, to tell me about scoring his first goal of the season, I tucked the envelope into the same drawer that held the custody petition. 2 documents representing opposite futures, one threatening to tear my family apart, the other providing unexpected power to hold it together. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt something beyond fear and exhaustion. A familiar sensation I'd known in combat, the clarity that comes with having not just a mission, but the resources to complete it. My in-laws had just declared war on the wrong veteran. That night, after tucking James into bed and checking that Lily had finished her homework, I spread the trust documents across my kitchen table. The medications I took post-chemotherapy made concentration difficult, but I forced myself to focus on every detail, every provision, every possibility contained in my grandfather's legacy. The trust was comprehensive, not just liquid assets and investments, but real estate holdings, business interests, and even a vacation property in Montana I'd never known about. My grandfather had constructed a financial fortress, anticipating challenges I hadn't seen coming even in my most strategic military planning. My phone buzzed with a text from Kate. How are you holding up? I've cleared my morning calendar for you. I hesitated before responding. The trust information felt almost surreal, too convenient to be believed. Part of me feared speaking it aloud would somehow make it disappear. But Kate wasn't just my attorney. She was a fellow veteran who understood that sometimes the most improbable reinforcements arrive exactly when needed. "Something's happened," I wrote. "I'll explain tomorrow," bringing documents. Sleep was elusive that night. Between the physical discomfort of treatment and the emotional whiplash of the day's events, I found myself pacing the hallway at 3 a.m., checking on my sleeping children. James, 10 years old, was sprawled across his bed surrounded by sports trophies and space posters. Lily's room reflected her transition to teenager, photographs of friends mingling with remnants of childhood stuffed animals she wasn't quite ready to abandon. These rooms, this home, had been our sanctuary after Richard's death. We'd built routines and memories here, supporting each other through grief that sometimes felt bottomless. The thought of my children being removed from this space, from me, created a physical pain distinct from my cancer. By morning, determination had replaced shock. I showered carefully around my port, applied makeup to mask the pallor chemotherapy had left on my skin, and dressed in my most professional outfit, armor for the battle ahead. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. 6 months. Ago, I'd been healthy and strong, my body conditioned by years of military discipline that I'd maintained even after retirement. Now, 20 pounds lighter with thinning hair, I appeared as fragile as my in-laws claimed I was, but appearances had always been deceiving in combat too. After dropping the children at school, ignoring the curious glances from other parents, who'd undoubtedly heard rumors about the custody petition, I drove to Kate's office with both sets of documents, the court papers and my grandfather's trust. Kate's law practice operated from a converted Victorian house downtown. Her office, decorated with subtle nods to her military service alongside her law credentials. She listened without interruption as I explained the situation, her expression shifting from concern to astonishment as I detailed my grandfather's trust. "This changes everything," she said, reviewing the financial statements. The Wells' main advantage was their resources. They assumed you'd be forced to represent yourself or rely on overworked legal aid. "They've never respected me," I said, the bitterness I usually suppressed rising to the surface. To them, I was always the enlisted girl who trapped their officer son. Even after 15 years of marriage, even after I reached the rank of major, Richard's death just gave them the opening to reclaim what they think should be theirs, the children. Kate nodded, familiar with the story. Richard's family came from old money and military tradition, generations of commissioned officers, and strategic marriages. My background as an enlisted soldier who earned her commission through merit rather than academy credentials had always been viewed as insufficient, despite my eventually outranking their son. "What exactly do you want to do?" Kate asked, her tone shifting to strategic planning. "We can certainly defeat the custody petition with these resources. I can bring in specialists, arrange for expert witnesses to testify about how children benefit from remaining with a parent during illness when proper support systems are in place." I stared out her office window, watching people move through their ordinary Tuesday morning routines, unaware that inside this room, a counteroffensive was being planned. "I want more than just defeating their petition," I said finally. "I want them to never try this again. I want protection for my children that doesn't depend on my health status or their financial advantage." Kate studied me, recognizing the shift in my demeanor. We'd served in the same combat zones, though at different times. She understood that sometimes the best defense required an overwhelming show of force. "What did you have in mind?" "I need to understand what vulnerabilities Thomas Wells has," I said. "His company, his reputation, his finances. I need leverage." Kate leaned back in her chair. "That's moving beyond family law into corporate intelligence. I know someone who can help with that. Another veteran who specializes in corporate research. Very thorough, very discreet." "Set it up," I said. "And I need you to prepare the strongest possible response to their petition. No expense spared. I want them shocked by the level of opposition they face at the hearing. As Kate made calls, I reviewed my grandfather's letter again. One line stood out. Power isn't about domination, Sarah. It's about creating circumstances where those who would harm you realize that the cost of doing so is simply too high to bear. My grandfather had understood something fundamental about people like the Wells. They calculated every move in terms of advantage and cost. Right now, they believed pursuing custody would be relatively straightforward. A grieving ill mother, with limited resources against their wealth and influence. I needed to dramatically recalculate that equation for them. Kate's investigator, a former military intelligence officer named Marcus, arrived within the hour. His methodical approach reminded me of mission briefings. No wasted words, clear, objectives, precise execution plans. Wells' development has been successful, but they're overextended, Marcus explained after making several calls. They've leveraged their existing properties to finance an aggressive expansion into the Riverside district. The cornerstone is the old Harmon building. They're converting it to luxury condos and retail space. How vulnerable is this project? I asked. Construction loans require certain milestones and pre-sales targets. From what I can gather, they're behind schedule and the primary lender is getting nervous. Thomas has been seeking additional investors to shore up confidence. I nodded slowly, memories surfacing from conversations years ago. Richard mentioned once that his father's business strategy was always too leveraged. He expanded quickly during good markets, but never built enough cash reserves for downturns. That tracks with what I'm seeing, Marcus confirmed. On paper, Wells' development is worth millions, but their liquidity is constrained. Most of their assets are tied up in properties and developments. What would happen if someone acquired their construction loan notes from the bank? I asked. Both Kate and Marcus looked at me with newfound respect and caution. If you controlled their debt, you'd essentially have leverage over their entire current operation, Marcus said. But banks don't typically sell performing loans, even anxious ones. Every bank has a price, I replied, thinking of the $78 million now at my disposal. Find out who holds their primary construction financing and what it would take to acquire those notes. As Marcus left to pursue this avenue, Kate returned to the custody petition. We need to file our response by tomorrow. I'm bringing in Dr. Cray. Levine. She's a psychologist who specializes in children coping with parental illness. She can conduct evaluations and testify about the children's current well-being. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. Between a follow-up oncology appointment, where my blood counts were thankfully high enough to avoid postponing treatment, meetings with financial advisors to formally take control of the trust, and preparations for the custody hearing, I barely had time to process the seismic shift in my circumstances. The children sensed something significant was happening, but attributed my increased energy and focus to good news from the doctors. I hadn't told them about their grandparents' legal action, hoping to resolve the situation before they needed to know. Thursday morning, I received a call from Marcus. The First National Bank holds the primary construction loan for the Harmon Building project, $22 million outstanding. The loan isn't in default, but the bank's internal risk assessment has flagged it due to construction delays and lower than projected pre-sales. Can it be acquired? Not conventionally, he admitted. But their loan committee is meeting tomorrow to discuss increasing the reserve requirements, which would put significant pressure on Wells' development. A capital injection from a new partner could be attractive to all parties right now. How do I position myself as that partner? You don't, Marcus said. But the Reeves Trust could establish a real estate investment subsidiary that approaches the bank and Wells' development simultaneously. With proper structure, you could effectively gain control without revealing yourself as the primary investor until the moment of your choosing. This approach required immediate action. The trustees moved with surprising efficiency, establishing Reeves Capital Investments as a new entity with sufficient legal separation to mask my direct involvement. By Friday afternoon, Preliminary discussions were underway with both the bank and, through intermediaries, Wells Development itself. Meanwhile, our response to the custody petition had been filed, requesting dismissal on multiple grounds and including affidavits from the children's teachers, my doctors, and neighbors, all attesting to the stable home environment I maintained despite my health challenges. Kate had also filed motions for financial disclosure from the Wells, a strategic move to signal our unexpected legal firepower. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. On Monday afternoon, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, I saw Eleanor Wells, tall, immaculately dressed, her silver hair perfectly styled. For a moment, I considered not answering, but strategic engagement was sometimes necessary. "Eleanor," I said evenly, opening the door but not inviting her in. "This isn't a good time." "I think we should talk, Sarah," she said, her practiced smile not reaching her eyes. "May I come in?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. Eleanor had always moved through the world with entitled confidence, the kind that came from generations of wealth and social standing. She surveyed my living room with the same subtle scrutiny she'd always applied, noting the stack of medical bills on the side table, the basket of unfolded laundry, the children's school books scattered across the coffee table. "Your response to our petition was quite extensive," she began, selecting her words carefully. "Thomas and I were surprised by the level of legal representation you've secured. Did you expect me to simply surrender my children without a fight?" I remained standing, unwilling to settle into a comfortable conversation. "We're not trying to take them from you, Sarah. We're trying to provide stability during your illness." Her voice carried the same reasonable tone she'd used when suggesting I change my hairstyle or home decor to better reflect Richard's status. "The stress of single parenting while undergoing cancer treatment isn't good for you or the children. My children's stability comes from remaining in their home with their mother, supported by friends and neighbors who have been here for us since Richard died. The same neighbors who were here when you and Thomas visited exactly twice in 18 months. Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "We're offering financial support, the best schools, connections that will secure their futures. Surely you want what's best for them. What's best is for their grandparents to support their relationship with their mother, not try to legally separate them during a health crisis." She sighed, her disappointment in my intransigence evident. "I'd hoped we could reach an understanding without an unpleasant court battle. Thomas is prepared to offer a very generous support arrangement that would allow you to focus on your recovery while we take on the day-to-day responsibilities. There's nothing to negotiate, Eleanor. I'm their mother. They stay with me." She rose to leave, smoothing her already immaculate slacks. "This approach isn't helping anyone, Sarah. Thomas has connections with the family court judges. We have resources you can't match. Fighting us will only drain what limited energy you have during your treatment." The transparent threat, the casual reference to her husband's influence and their financial advantages, solidified my resolve. Eleanor still believed she was dealing with the same overwhelmed, under-resourced widow she'd always underestimated. "I'll see you in court tomorrow," I said, opening the front door. "Please don't come to my home unannounced again." After she left, I called Kate to update her on the visit, then Marcus to check on the progress with Wells Development's financing. The pieces were moving into place, but timing would be critical. The custody hearing would begin before our financial maneuver could be completed. That evening, I sat with my children at dinner, watching them bicker over the last dinner roll, discuss school projects, and plan their weekend activities. They had adapted to our new normal with resilience. I marveled at daily, adjusting to my treatment schedule, stepping up with household responsibilities, supporting each other when I couldn't be as present as I wanted. "Mom, are you okay?" Lily asked, noticing my unusual quietness. "You've been weird all week." "Just thinking about how proud I am of you both," I said truthfully. "We've been through a lot. But we're still a team. The best team, James declared with 10-year-old certainty. Dad always said Team Henderson never quits. Never, I agreed, my resolve strengthening further. Tomorrow would determine whether my children remained with me through my cancer battle or were temporarily placed with grandparents who saw them as extensions of their son rather than individuals with their own needs and bonds. I was prepared to deploy every resource my grandfather had provided to ensure the outcome protected my family. The Wells had initiated this battle believing I was at my weakest. They were about to discover just how formidable a cornered mother could be, especially one with military training and unexpected financial artillery at her disposal. The county courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky, its stone facade a reminder of the permanent decisions made within its walls. I arrived an hour early for the hearing, dressed in a navy suit that hung looser than it had 6 months ago, but still conveyed the authority I needed. Kate met me at the entrance, professional and focused despite the short preparation time, our response filing caused quite a stir, she said as we walked through security. The judge assigned to our case called me personally yesterday, asking about the volume of supporting documentation we submitted. Is that normal? I asked, nodding to a security guard I recognized from my time working veterans advocacy cases after retirement. Not remotely. Judge Harmon has a reputation for thoroughness. He's already reviewed all our materials and has requested the Wells attorneys provide additional documentation about their proposed custody arrangements. Kate's slight smile suggested this was a positive development. They were expecting a routine emergency order, not a contested hearing with extensive evidence. We set up in the assigned conference room. Family court proceedings in our county typically began with a settlement conference before moving to a formal hearing, giving parties a final opportunity to reach an agreement without judicial intervention. At precisely 9 o'clock, Thomas and Eleanor Wells arrived with their attorney, Philip Chambers, silver-haired and distinguished in an expensive suit, known for representing the city's wealthiest families in divorces and custody disputes. Thomas looked exactly as I remembered from Richard's funeral, tall and imposing with perfectly tailored clothes and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to deference. He'd barely acknowledged me at the service, focusing instead on parading his grief to the assembled military officers and business associates. Sarah, Thomas nodded curtly before turning to his attorney. Let's get this moving. Kate introduced herself as my counsel, handing additional copies of our filings to Chambers, who frowned at the volume of material. The mediator assigned to our case, a court-appointed attorney named Diaz, arrived moments later and established the ground rules for our discussion. Before we begin, Diaz said, I want to clarify that emergency custody modifications require extraordinary circumstances and clear evidence that the current arrangement presents immediate risk to the children's well-being. Mr. and Mrs. Wells, as the petitioning party, you'll present your concerns first. Chambers cleared his throat. Your Honor, Thomas and Eleanor Wells are seeking temporary custody of their grandchildren during their daughter-in-law's cancer treatment. Mrs. Henderson is currently undergoing aggressive chemotherapy that renders her physically incapacitated for days at a time. The children, already traumatized by their father's death, are essentially caring for themselves and their mother. The characterization was so divorced from reality that I had to focus on my breathing to remain calm. Kate placed a steadying hand on my arm. We have documented multiple instances where the children have been late to school, where meals are being provided by neighbors rather than their mother, and where their academic performance is suffering, Chambers continued. Mrs. Henderson's condition is unfortunately deteriorating, and she has no family in the area to provide stability. That's factually incorrect, Kate interjected. Mrs. Henderson has established a comprehensive support network. The documentation we've submitted includes statements from 15 different community members who assist the family on a regular, coordinated schedule. The children's teachers confirm their attendance and performance remain within normal parameters. Given the circumstances, Diaz reviewed the competing documentation. Mrs. Henderson, Would you like to respond to the concerns raised? I straightened in my chair, making eye contact with Thomas and Eleanor. My cancer diagnosis is serious, but not terminal. My treatment protocol is expected to conclude in 4 months, and my prognosis is good. During treatment, I've maintained my role as mother with appropriate accommodations. I gestured to the binder Kate had prepared. The children's therapist has provided an assessment confirming they're adjusting well. Their pediatrician has noted no health concerns. Most importantly, removing them from their home, school, friends, and support system during my illness would create additional trauma, not alleviate it. Thomas leaned forward. Sarah has always been stubborn about accepting help. Richard complained about it frequently. The casual invocation of my dead husband's name, the implication that he would have sided with his parents, sparked anger I quickly suppressed. Richard left detailed wishes regarding the children's care in the event of his death. The military family care plan we established named me as primary caregiver, and my friend Kate as secondary guardian if I became unable to care for them. The SAT Wells were deliberately not included in that plan. Eleanor's face tightened. We were never consulted about those arrangements. Because Richard knew you would try to control rather than support our parenting decisions, I replied evenly. Just as you're doing now. The discussion continued for over an hour, growing increasingly tense. The Wells arguments focused on their financial resources and ability to provide advantages the children supposedly lacked in my care. Their attorney repeatedly emphasized the temporary nature of the arrangement, suggesting I could visit freely during my recovery, as though I were an outsider in my children's lives. Eventually, Diaz called a brief recess before we would proceed to the formal hearing with Judge Harmon. As the Wells and their attorney stepped outside, Kate received a text message that brought a small smile to her face. Marcus? I asked quietly. She nodded. The bank meeting is happening right now. The Reeves Capital representative is making the proposal. My phone vibrated with an incoming call, a number I didn't recognize. I need to take this, I told Kate, stepping into the hallway. Mrs. Henderson? This is Patricia Lawson from First National Bank. The voice was brisk and professional. I understand you're the beneficial owner of Reeves Capital Investments. That's correct, I confirmed, moving further from the conference room doors. Our loan committee has approved the acquisition proposal for the Wells Development portfolio. However, before we proceed, I want to confirm you understand the scope of what you're undertaking. The total exposure is $22 million, and while the collateral value supports the loan, the project faces significant challenges. I understand completely. Please proceed with the transaction as discussed with my representatives. Very well. The documents will be executed within the hour. As requested, notification to Wells Development will come directly from the bank rather than Reeves Capital. Is there anything else you need from us? Just the timing. When will Wells be informed? Our chairman is meeting with Thomas Wells at 11:30. Given the court matter we've been made aware of, we wanted to ensure the notification occurred during your recess, but before the judge renders any decision. I checked my watch, 10:45. That's perfect. Thank you. When I returned to the conference room, Kate raised an eyebrow questioningly. I nodded, and she straightened her files with renewed purpose. At 11 o'clock, we reconvened before Judge Harmon, a serious man in his 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He reviewed the files meticulously before addressing us. I've considered the emergency petition and response thoroughly. Before rendering a decision, I have several questions. He turned to the Wells attorney. Mr. Chambers, your client's petition cites financial stability as a primary factor in their favor. I'd like documentation of the arrangements they propose to make for the children's education, healthcare, and emotional support during their mother's treatment. Chambers presented additional materials outlining private schooling options, healthcare, coverage, and a proposed visitation schedule that would allow me to see my children on weekends when feeling well enough. The The clinical dismantling of my family was presented as a logical solution to a temporary problem. Mrs. Henderson, Judge Harmon continued, your response indicates you've established support systems, but I'm concerned about the sustainability of these arrangements if your condition worsens. What contingencies have you established? I outlined the detailed plans Kate and I had prepared, the calendar of support from my community, the arrangements with the school counselor to monitor, the children's emotional well-being, and the financial resources now available to hire additional help as needed. Your Honor, I added, I've recently received an inheritance that eliminates any financial concerns related to my treatment or the children's care. I can now afford full-time assistance while maintaining the children's routine and school placements. Thomas. Wells shifted in his seat, exchanging glances with his attorney. This was clearly new information to them. The judge made notes before continuing his questions. At precisely 11:35, the courtroom door opened and a court officer approached Thomas, whispering something that caused his face to drain of color. He immediately stood. Your Honor, I apologize, but I have an urgent business matter that requires my immediate attention. Could we request a brief recess? Judge Harmon frowned. Mr. Wells, we're in the middle of a hearing regarding your petition for emergency custody of your grandchildren. What could possibly take precedence? Thomas appeared uncharacteristically flustered. It's a time-sensitive financial transaction, Your Honor. My company may be at risk. More important than your grandchildren's welfare? The welfare you just testified was your paramount concern? Eleanor placed a hand on Thomas's arm, her expression alarmed. Chambers attempted to intervene, but Thomas was already moving toward the door. 15 minutes, Your Honor. Please. Judge Harmon's expression hardened. This court will recess for 15 minutes. Mr. Wells, I expect a full explanation upon your return. As they hurried out, Kate leaned close to me. What exactly is happening? Thomas just learned that Reeves Capital has acquired his construction loans from First National. He's about to discover that his entire development project, and possibly his company, now answer to a new lender who can call the notes due if certain conditions aren't met. Kate's eyes widened. And those conditions? We'll discuss that when he returns. The 15-minute recess stretched to 20, then 30. When the Wells finally returned, Thomas looked ashen. Eleanor appeared confused, whispering urgently to their attorney, who seemed equally bewildered by whatever had transpired. Judge Harmon was visibly irritated. Mr. Wells, you've kept this court waiting. I trust your emergency has been addressed? Not. Entirely, Your Honor. I apologize for the delay. Thomas's voice lacked its usual authority. However, given new developments, we would like to request a continuance of this hearing to reassess our petition. The judge removed his glasses. Mr. Wells, this court's time is valuable, as is Mrs. Henderson's. You filed an emergency petition, claiming immediate intervention was necessary for the children's welfare. Either that emergency exists, or it doesn't. Chambers conferred quickly with Thomas before addressing the court. Your Honor, my clients would like to withdraw their petition at this time. They believe further family discussion might yield a more cooperative approach. Judge Harmon turned to me. Mrs. Henderson, do you have any objection to the petition being withdrawn? I exchanged glances with Kate before responding. No objection, Your Honor, provided the withdrawal is with prejudice and cannot be refiled without significant change in circumstances. So ordered, Judge Harmon declared. The petition is withdrawn with prejudice. Mrs. Henderson, I wish you good health and a speedy recovery. This matter is closed. As we gathered our materials, Thomas approached me directly, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, privately. I have nothing to say to you, Thomas. I think you do. His voice lowered. Reeves Capital. The construction loans. This wasn't coincidence. I met his gaze steadily. We can discuss it at my house. Tonight at 7. Bring Eleanor. Sarah. 7 o'clock. after I've had dinner with my children and helped them with homework. Family first. Isn't that what you always taught Richard? Outside the courthouse, Kate waited until we were in her car before asking the question. What exactly did you do? Reeves Capital acquired all of Wells Development's outstanding construction loans. The terms include accelerated payment provisions that could be triggered immediately, essentially forcing them into default unless certain conditions are met. And those conditions include dropping the custody case. That's just the beginning, I replied, looking out at the city Thomas Wells had helped build with his developments. The full terms will be discussed tonight. I spent the afternoon with my children after school, maintaining the normal routine that had become our anchor after Richard's death and throughout my treatment. We hadn't discussed the custody case, but children are perceptive. They sensed the tension had lifted. You seem happier today, Mom, Lily observed as she worked on her science project at the kitchen table. Did something good happen? I considered how much to share. Some problems we were having got resolved today, and yes, that makes me happy. Was it about Grandma and Grandpa Wells? She asked, surprising me. I heard you talking to Kate about them wanting us to stay at their house while you're sick. My heart sank. You weren't supposed to know about that. Lily shrugged with the pragmatic acceptance some children develop when faced with adult complexities. James doesn't know. I didn't tell him because it would just make him upset, but I knew you wouldn't let them take us away. I pulled her into a hug, my fierce, perceptive daughter who shouldered burdens beyond her years. You're right. I wouldn't. At 7 o'clock precisely, Thomas and Eleanor arrived. I had arranged for a neighbor to take the children for ice cream, wanting this conversation to occur without them present. Thomas looked older than he had that morning, the strain of the day's financial revelations evident in his face. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the living room. Would you like coffee? I want an explanation, Thomas said, remaining standing. How did you acquire those loans? What game are you playing? It's not a game, Thomas. It's protection. I sat down, forcing him to either join me or continue looming awkwardly. Eventually, both he and Eleanor sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa. My grandfather left me significantly more resources than anyone realized. When you decided to use your financial advantage to take my children, I decided to level the playing field. By threatening my company? Thomas's voice rose. 30 years of building Wells Development, and you're willing to destroy it over a temporary custody arrangement? You weren't proposing a temporary arrangement. You were laying groundwork to permanently remove my children from my care, using my illness as the pretext. I kept my voice calm, factual. You underestimated me, just as you've always underestimated me. That was a tactical error, Eleanor interjected, her composure cracking slightly. We only wanted what's best for the children. Surely you can see that having them stay with us during your treatments would be easier for everyone. Easier for whom? Not for Lily and James, who would be separated from their home, their friends, their school, and most importantly, their mother, during a time when they most need stability and reassurance. I turned back to Thomas. The loan acquisition is complete and legally binding. Reeves Capital now controls your company's financial future. Thomas's face flushed with anger. What do you want? Money? Is this extortion? This is consequence. Thomas, actions have them. I handed him a folder containing the terms drafted by the trust's attorneys. Inside you'll find the new loan conditions. They're actually quite favorable. Better interest rates than you had with First National, extended completion timelines for the Harmon Building project, and additional capital available for your Southside development. He opened the folder, suspiciously, scanning the documents with growing confusion. There must be a catch. Several, actually. First, you will formally renounce any future custody claims against me, with financial penalties if violated. Second, you will establish college trust funds for Lily and James that neither you nor I can access until they reach 18. Third, You will create a foundation in Richard's name to support families of fallen service members. Eleanor's expression shifted from hostility to uncertainty. You're not trying to destroy us? No, Eleanor. Despite what you believe, I never wanted conflict with you. I wanted you to be loving grandparents to my children, not adversaries trying to replace me in their lives. Thomas continued reading the document, his business instincts evidently recognizing that the financial terms were genuinely favorable. Why would you offer this? You could demand much harsher terms. Because destroying your company wouldn't benefit my children. Having grandparents who respect boundaries and support their relationship with their mother would. I let them absorb the document fully before continuing. My illness has taught me that life is too short for unnecessary battles. Richard would have hated seeing us in court today. This arrangement gives you financial stability and my family security. It's the kind of compromise he always sought between the people he loved. The mention of Richard seemed to reach Eleanor in a way my previous words hadn't. Her carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing the grief she typically concealed behind perfectionism and control. We miss him so much, she whispered, her voice breaking. The children are all we have left of him. I know, I acknowledged, my own grief never far from the surface. But they're not just extensions of Richard. They're their own people with their own needs. Right now, they need consistency and the reassurance that cancer won't take their mother from them too. Thomas tapped the document with a manicured finger, business acumen momentarily overriding emotion. These terms would stabilize our current projects and provide capital for expansion, but you'd effectively become our primary lender. Reeves Capital would, I corrected. A separate legal entity that happens to advance my interests and those of my children. Consider it a firewall between our personal conflicts and business arrangements. And if we refuse, the challenge in... His voice was weaker than usual, a negotiating tactic from habit rather than conviction. Then Reeves Capital exercises its rights under the loan agreements. The accelerated payment provisions would trigger, requiring immediate repayment of the $22 million. We both know Wells Development doesn't have that liquidity. Eleanor placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm. Thomas, stop. This isn't a negotiation we can win. She turned to me, her expression complex with reluctant respect and lingering resentment. You've outmaneuvered us completely. It wasn't about winning, I said, meaning it. It was about protecting my family while creating a solution that serves everyone's interests. I reached for my water glass, suddenly tired as the day's adrenaline began to fade. The children will be home soon. I'd like this resolved before they return. Thomas studied me with new awareness, perhaps finally seeing beyond the image he'd constructed of his son's unsuitable wife. You're more like your grandfather than anyone realized. You knew my grandfather? This unexpected connection surprised me. Samuel Reeves was a formidable competitor in the early days of my company. We bid against each other on several major commercial properties. A reluctant smile touched Thomas's lips. He outmaneuvered me more than once. I never connected. You to him, different last names. He was my mother's father, I explained, the coincidence still processing. I barely knew him growing up. My parents divorced when I was young, and my father had primary custody. Thomas nodded slowly. Samuel was ruthlessly effective in business, but absolutely ethical. Somehow you inherited that strategic mind without even knowing him. He sighed heavily, the fight visibly leaving him. We'll sign your agreement. Within 30 minutes, the documents were executed. The compromise that would reshape our family's future was completed with less ceremony than buying a car. As the Wells prepared to leave, Eleanor hesitated at the door. The children, she began awkwardly. Could we still see them? Not custody, just normal grandparent visits? The vulnerability in her question revealed what perhaps had been driving their actions all along. Fear of losing their connection to the only living pieces of their son that remained. They're your grandchildren, Eleanor. They need you in their lives, just as grandparents, not as replacements for their parents. I softened my tone. Sunday dinners, perhaps? Once a month to start? Relief transformed her face. We'd like that very much. After they left, I sank onto the couch, physical exhaustion finally overtaking me. The day had demanded more strength than I'd exhibited since my diagnosis. Mental, emotional, and physical resources stretched to their limits. Yet beneath the fatigue was a foundation of security I hadn't felt since opening that first ominous envelope. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor. The kids had double scoops and are now properly sugared up. Heading back now. I smiled, picturing James's chocolate-smeared face and Lily's inevitable careful selection of multiple flavors to maximize the experience. These ordinary moments, ice cream choices, homework struggles, bedtime stories, were the heartbeat of our family life, the very things the Wells had nearly disrupted. When the children burst through the door minutes later, their exuberance was exactly the medicine I needed. James launched into a detailed account of the huge sundae he'd constructed, while Lily more cautiously observed my expression, still the protector checking for signs of adult distress. Everything's good, I assured her quietly while James continued his animated description. Better than good, actually. She studied me with her father's thoughtful eyes before nodding, accepting my assessment with the seriousness of a junior officer receiving a situation report. That night, after tucking them into bed, I returned to the kitchen table where my grandfather's letter still sat among the trust documents. I reread it slowly, understanding his legacy in a deeper way after the day's events. Power used wisely creates options where none seemed possible, he'd written. I've watched you navigate military hierarchies and personal challenges with strategic patience. This trust isn't about wealth. It's about freedom to make choices, based on principle rather than necessity. My grandfather had recognized something in me long before I'd seen it in myself, an ability to think beyond immediate circumstances to longer-term objectives. The same strategic thinking that had served me in military planning had now preserved my family's future. The next morning brought my scheduled chemotherapy session. As the nurse connected the IV to my port, I felt the familiar cold rush of medication entering my system. The physical battle with cancer continued even as the legal and financial battles had been resolved. You seem different today, observed Maria, the oncology nurse who had been with me since my first treatment. More relaxed. I had some personal matters that needed resolution, I explained simply. They've been handled, she nodded, adjusting the medication flow. That's good. Stress reduction is an important part of treatment success. Your blood counts are looking better this week. The new medication seems to be working. The treatment. Room television played a local news channel on mute. A business segment caught my attention. Thomas Wells appeared on screen at what looked like a press conference, with text scrolling beneath announcing a major partnership for downtown development. I asked Maria to turn up the volume. Wells Development is pleased to announce a significant capital investment from Reeves Capital that will accelerate our Harmon Building project and expand our commitment to the Riverside District, Thomas was saying, looking remarkably composed for someone whose company had nearly collapsed the previous day. This partnership represents a new chapter for our company and for downtown revitalization. No mention of the circumstances behind this partnership, of course. Thomas was already recasting our arrangement as a strategic business alliance rather than a forced compromise. It was exactly what I'd expected, and in many ways preferred. The children would never need to know the full complexity of what had transpired. Kate arrived during the final hour of my treatment, bringing coffee and updates. She settled into the chair beside my recliner, keeping her voice low in the shared treatment room. The Wells attorney filed the custody withdrawal paperwork this morning. Marcus confirmed the trust payments have been initiated for the college, Funds and articles of incorporation were filed for the Richard Henderson Memorial Foundation with initial funding of $2 million. They're moving quickly, I observed, impressed despite myself with Thomas's efficiency once a course of action was determined. Self-interest is a powerful motivator, Kate replied dryly. The business press is already covering the strategic partnership between Wells Development and the mysterious Reeves Capital. Thomas is spinning this as a brilliant business move on his part. Let him, I said, watching the medication drip steadily into my veins. Public perception matters more to the Wells than to me. As long as the legal protections for the children are secured, Thomas can tell whatever story helps him save face. Kate studied me with the frank assessment of an old friend. You know, most people would have gone scorched earth after what they tried to pull. You had the leverage to destroy their company completely. Destroying Wells Development wouldn't serve any constructive purpose. The children would lose their grandparents' financial support. Hundreds of people would lose their jobs, and the city would lose important development projects. I adjusted the blanket across my legs as a chill from the medication set in. Besides, this way creates a lasting deterrent. If they ever move against us again, they know exactly what I'm capable of. Spoken like a true tactician, Kate smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. After treatment, I spent the rest of the day managing the familiar cycle of side effects: nausea, fatigue, the peculiar mental fog that made complex thoughts difficult to grasp. This was the reality the Wells had used to justify their custody petition, the undeniable physical limitations my illness imposed. Yet even at my weakest, I remained the center of my children's world, the foundation they relied upon. When Lily and James returned from school, they moved through the well-established routine we'd developed for treatment days. Lily heated the ghee, soup a neighbor had delivered, while James brought me ginger tea and proudly displayed his math quiz with a hard-earned B+. They worked on homework at the coffee table in the living room where I rested, creating a cocoon of ordinary family life around my temporary incapacity. Mom, James asked between math problems, are Grandma and Grandpa Wells coming over this weekend? They called my phone today. I froze momentarily, unsure what Thomas and Eleanor might have said to him. They called you directly? He nodded, unconcerned. Grandpa said they want to take us to the Science Museum on Sunday and then dinner at their house. He said to ask you if it's okay. The request was perfectly reasonable, and notably, directed through me rather than presented as a fait accompli to the children. It appeared Thomas and Eleanor were already adapting to the new boundaries. Would you like to go? I asked carefully. Science Museum has a new space exhibition, James said, which was as close to enthusiastic assent as a 10-year-old boy generally offers. And Grandma said Lily could help her in the greenhouse with the orchids. I glanced at Lily, who shrugged, with studied casualness. Their house is kind of boring, but the greenhouse is cool, and Grandma doesn't hover as much as she used to. Then yes, you can go on Sunday, I decided. I'll call Grandma back to confirm. Later that evening, when the children were occupied with showers and bedtime routines, I called Eleanor. She answered on the first ring as though she'd been waiting for my call. Sarah, she said, her tone cautiously neutral. James mentioned he spoke with you about Sunday. He did. The museum. Visit sounds fine. I appreciate you checking with me first. A brief silence followed before Eleanor responded. We're trying to respect the new arrangements. Thomas and I have discussed how we've handled things poorly since Richard's death. The admission clearly didn't come easily to her. Eleanor Wells had spent decades crafting an image of flawless competence and social propriety. Acknowledging mistakes, especially to someone she'd considered beneath her family's standing, represented a significant shift. It's been a difficult adjustment for all of us, I offered, choosing reconciliation over righteous victory. Richard would want us to find a way forward for the children's sake. Yes, he would. Her voice softened at the mention of her son. "Sarah, may I ask, how are you really doing? With the treatments?" The question seemed genuinely concerned rather than information gathering for future custody attempts. "It's challenging," I admitted. "The current protocol is aggressive, but my oncologist is pleased with the response. 3 more months of treatment, then surgery, followed by radiation. Is there anything you need? Anything we could do to help without overstepping?" I considered her offer, recognizing the effort it represented. "Actually, yes. The children have activities on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Lily's dance class and James's soccer practice happen simultaneously. Those are difficult days for me to manage transportation with treatment fatigue. We could handle the Tuesday and Thursday activities," Eleanor suggested, audible relief in her voice at being offered a constructive role. "Pick them up from school, take them to their activities, perhaps dinner afterward, and bring them home for bedtime?" That would be genuinely helpful, I acknowledged. It would give me recovery time on treatment days without disrupting their routines. The conversation continued, tentatively constructing a framework for grandparent involvement that supported rather than undermined my parenting. By the time we disconnected, a fragile foundation for a new family dynamic had been established. Not the warm relationship I'd once hoped for with Richard's parents, but a functional arrangement that prioritized the children's well-being. Colonel Martinez called the following week as I was preparing dinner, the children setting the table around, me in our comfortable evening routine. "Major Henderson," he greeted me formally. "I wondered if you'd provide a status update on the deployment of those resources." I smiled at his military phrasing. "The situation has been successfully resolved, Colonel. Opposition forces have withdrawn, and a treaty has been negotiated that protects all critical assets." "Excellent. Samuel would be pleased with your tactical approach. He always said overwhelming force should be displayed but used judiciously." "You knew him well," I observed, stirring the pasta sauce while silently directing James to add napkins to the table setting. "We served different wars but understood the same principles," Martinez replied. "Your grandfather believed that the best victory leaves your opponent with dignity intact, but absolutely clear about who holds the superior position. I take it that's the approach you employed?" "Precisely." The Wells family business continues. Their social standing remains intact, but they understand completely that any future attempts to separate me from my children would have catastrophic consequences for their interests. "And the health campaign? How is that progressing?" His concern for my cancer battle touched me. "Challenging, but proceeding according to plan. The prognosis remains positive." After dinner, as the children tackled homework, I retreated to the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular oranges and purples. My body remained embattled, weakened by treatment, fighting an invisible enemy within, but my mind was at peace in a way it hadn't been since the diagnosis. The financial security my grandfather had provided hadn't simply protected me from the Wells custody attempt. It had created a foundation for true healing. I could focus on recovery without the constant stress of medical bills or work obligations. The children could maintain their activities and routines. Most importantly, we could face the future together, as a family unit strengthened rather than fractured by adversity. My phone chimed with a text from Kate. "Just confirmed the final paperwork for the Richard Henderson Memorial Foundation. First grants to military families will be distributed next month. You did good, Major." I smiled at her message, imagining Richard's reaction to a foundation bearing his name. He had always been uncomfortable with recognition, preferring to support fellow service members quietly without ceremony. Yet he would have appreciated the purpose, providing financial support to families experiencing the same challenges we had faced after his death. The foundation represented something beyond mere victory in my conflict with the Wells. It transformed a potential family tragedy into a legacy that would honor Richard while helping others. The trust fund my grandfather had established hadn't just protected my children from losing their mother's custody. It had created ripples of positive impact that would extend far beyond our immediate circumstances. As darkness settled over the yard, I heard Lily call from inside, a homework question she needed help with. I gathered my strength and rose from the chair, moving toward her voice. The cancer battle continued, with difficult treatments and uncertain outcomes still ahead. But the other battles, for my children, for security, for dignity, those had been decisively won. My grandfather's legacy had provided the resources, but the strategic mind that deployed them had been my own. In protecting what mattered, most I had discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed, the same strengths that would carry me through the medical challenges still to come. Cancer might have weakened my body temporarily, but attempting to take my children had awakened a formidable adversary the Wells had never anticipated. A mother with military training, strategic thinking, and now, unexpectedly, the financial artillery to match their own. In their misguided attempt to use my illness against me, they had inadvertently helped me discover my most powerful weapons. 2 months after the custody battle, my medical team scheduled a comprehensive evaluation to assess my response to treatment. The aggressive chemotherapy protocol had taken its toll, my weight had dropped to concerning levels, and fatigue had become my constant companion. But preliminary scans suggested the cancer was responding. This evaluation would determine whether we continued the current approach or needed to adjust course. The children had settled into our new routine with remarkable resilience. Sunday dinners with the Wells had evolved from stiff, awkward affairs into genuine family gatherings. Eleanor had gradually relaxed her perfectionist standards, allowing Lily and James to be children rather than extensions of the Wells family legacy. Thomas remained more reserved, but had found connection with James through shared interest in architecture and building design, often bringing scaled models from his development projects for James to examine. On treatment days, the Wells now handled all logistics for the children: school pickup, activities, dinner, and homework supervision. This arrangement, born of necessity and conflict, had paradoxically created space for healing on multiple levels. The children benefited from their grandparents' involvement. I received critical recovery time, and Thomas and Eleanor experienced the joy of grandparenting without the burden of full parental responsibility. Kate arrived at the hospital for my evaluation appointment, having appointed herself my personal advocate through the medical journey. Her legal training made her particularly valuable in these settings. She asked questions I was too exhausted to formulate, took detailed notes, and ensured all information was clearly explained. "Nervous?" she asked as we waited in the consultation room. "Terrified," I admitted. "The treatment response determines everything: surgery options, radiation protocols, long-term prognosis." Dr. Patel, my oncologist, entered with a tablet displaying my scan results. Her expression gave nothing away as she greeted us and settled into her chair. "Before we discuss the scans, I want to review your overall status," she began methodically. "Your blood counts have been concerning, particularly after the last 2 treatment cycles. The weight loss is more than we like to see, and your cardiac function shows some stress from the medication." I nodded, absorbing these concerning observations with the disciplined compartmentalization I'd developed during military service. Facts. First, emotions later. "However," she continued, turning the tablet to show me the comparison scans, "your response to treatment has been exceptional. The primary tumor has reduced by approximately 68%, and we see no evidence of metastatic spread. This exceeds our expectations for this stage of treatment." Relief flooded through me so intensely I gripped the armrests to remain upright. Kate's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. "So the treatment is working," I managed, needing the confirmation in plain language. "Very effectively," Dr. Patel confirmed. "However, given the impact on your overall health, we need to modify our approach. I'm recommending we reduce the dosage for your final 2 cycles before surgery. This adjustment should mitigate the worst side effects while maintaining therapeutic benefit. We spent the next hour discussing the revised treatment plan, potential surgical approaches, and recovery expectations. The modified protocol would mean slightly longer overall treatment, but with improved quality of life during the process. A trade-off I gladly accepted. As Kate drove me home afterward, I found myself struggling to process the positive news. Military training and life experience had prepared me well for managing crisis and confronting threats. Accepting good news, allowing hope to flourish without qualification proved surprisingly challenging. "It's okay to be happy about this," Kate said, reading my expression. "The battle isn't over, but you're winning." "I know. It's just—" I searched for words to explain the complex emotions. When Richard died, when I received the cancer diagnosis, when the Wells filed for custody, each time, I adapted to the worst possible scenario. I planned, strategized, and deployed resources accordingly. Good news feels like a tactical vulnerability somehow. Kate nodded, understanding the military mindset we shared. In the field, optimism can be dangerous, but this isn't combat, Sarah. This is life. Your life. Allowing yourself to hope isn't a strategic weakness. That evening, I shared the positive medical news with the children in simple terms they could understand. James responded with immediate joy, declaring that we should celebrate with ice cream. Lily's reaction was more measured, her eyes studying, my face as though searching for hidden truths I might be sheltering her from. "Does this mean you're going to get better for sure?" she asked carefully. "The doctors are very encouraged by how the treatment is working," I replied honestly. "There are more steps ahead, surgery and radiation. But this is definitely good news." She nodded, processing this information with the careful analysis that reminded me so much of her father. "What does Grandpa Thomas think?" "He said he knows doctors who specialize in your kind of cancer." The question surprised me. "I haven't told your grandparents yet. I just got the news today." "Oh." She seemed troubled by this. "Grandma Eleanor asks me about your treatment every time we visit. She has a prayer group at church that prays for you." This revelation caught me completely off guard. Eleanor Wells, with her country club memberships and social status concerns, had never struck me as someone who would organize prayer support, particularly not for me. Perhaps there were depths to my mother-in-law I had never bothered to explore, too quick to accept Richard's characterization of his parents without forming my own complete assessment. "That's thoughtful of her," I managed. "I'll call them tonight to share the update." After the children were in bed, I made the call. Thomas answered, his tone shifting from businesslike to cautious when he realized who was calling. "Sarah, is everything all right with the children?" "The children are fine. I actually called to share some medical news. I had my mid-treatment evaluation today. The cancer is responding well to the chemotherapy." A moment of silence followed. "That's excellent news," he said finally, genuine relief evident in his voice. "Eleanor will be very pleased to hear this. She's been quite concerned, though she tries not to show it." "Lily mentioned a prayer group?" Thomas gave a small laugh. "Eleanor has mobilized half the church. She can be quite formidable when she has a mission." His tone softened slightly. "Despite our differences, we never wanted you to be ill, Sarah. Richard loved you. That makes you family, regardless of past conflicts." The acknowledgement, simple as it was, represented a significant shift. For 15 years, I had been the unsuitable wife their son had chosen despite their disapproval. Now, Thomas was explicitly including me within the family circle, separate from my status as the mother of their grandchildren. "The doctors are adjusting my treatment schedule," I explained. "The new protocol should be less debilitating, which means I might be able to handle more of the children's activities myself." "That's unnecessary," Thomas replied quickly. Eleanor and I have come to treasure our Tuesday and Thursday responsibilities. James has been helping me understand this Minecraft phenomenon, and Lily is showing remarkable aptitude for orchid cultivation. Unless you'd prefer to resume these duties yourself. No, I assured him. The arrangement works well for everyone. I just wanted you to know my capability might be increasing. Good. That's good. He cleared his throat. Sarah, there's something else we should discuss. The quarterly reports for Wells Development will be released next week. You'll be receiving them as Reeves Capital's representative. I'm aware. My financial advisors will review them. Yes, of course. But there's a particular development I wanted to mention personally. The Harmon Building project has secured anchor tenants for both commercial spaces, significantly ahead of projections. The terms of our agreement include performance bonuses when certain benchmarks are achieved. I smiled slightly at Thomas's business-like approach to what was essentially good news for both our interests. That's excellent progress. What I'm trying to say, he continued with uncharacteristic hesitation, is that the first performance payment to the Richard Henderson Memorial Foundation will be transferred next week. Approximately $1.2 million based on the tenant contracts secured. The foundation had been established as part of our agreement, but I hadn't expected significant funding for at least a year. This accelerated timeline suggested Thomas had prioritized deals that would trigger foundation payments. That's considerably ahead of schedule, I observed. Wells Development has had a particularly productive quarter, he replied with subtle pride. The capital infusion from Reeves allowed us to offer incentives to prospective tenants. Additionally, I've been personally focused on this project. The unsaid implication hung between us that Thomas had deliberately structured business deals to benefit the foundation bearing his son's name. It was a peace offering of sorts, wrapped in business terminology and performance metrics rather than emotional language. Richard would appreciate knowing his name is helping military families, I said, accepting the gesture in the spirit it was offered. Especially with the foundation's focus on childcare support for deployed single parents. That was always a concern for him. I know. Thomas's voice carried a weight of sadness rarely revealed. He called me before his final deployment concerned about provisions for you and the children if something happened. I didn't respond as supportively as I should have. I believed acknowledging the risk would somehow make it more likely. The admission surprised me. Richard had never mentioned calling his father with these concerns. He always wanted your approval, I said quietly. And I always assumed there would be more time to give it, Thomas replied, regret evident. Parents make mistakes, Sarah. Sometimes catastrophic ones. The conversation shifted to practical matters. The upcoming museum trip with the children, logistics for the following week's activities, Eleanor's plan to help Lily prepare for her science presentation. Yet something fundamental had changed in our interaction. Beneath the practical coordination was a fragile recognition of shared loss and mutual purpose that had never existed before. The following week brought my first treatment under the modified protocol. As promised, the side effects were less severe, still challenging but no longer debilitating. I found myself able to prepare dinner the evening after treatment, a small victory that represented significant improvement in my physical resilience. As the children and I ate together, James animatedly describing his soccer team's recent victory, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Lily went to answer it, returning with a delivery. A large basket filled with practical items. Ginger tea for nausea, unscented lotion for treatment, dried skin, puzzle books for hospital waiting rooms, and several frozen homemade meals in containers labeled with reheating instructions. It's from Grandma Eleanor, Lily reported, examining the accompanying card. She says these are things that helped her friend Patricia during chemotherapy. I examined the basket's contents, noting the thoughtful practicality of each item. Not flowers or generic gifts, but specific tools to address the actual challenges of cancer treatment. Eleanor had clearly consulted with someone who understood the process firsthand. That was very thoughtful, I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Lily nodded. Grandma said her friend from church had breast cancer last year. She said sometimes people don't know how to help, so they end up not helping at all, and she didn't want to make that mistake again. Again. The word caught my attention. An acknowledgement of past failures wrapped in a simple adverb. Eleanor was, in her own way, apologizing for not supporting us properly after Richard's death. The basket represented more than current assistance. It symbolized recognition of previous inadequacy. Later that evening, my phone chimed with an email notification. The quarterly financial report from Wells Development had arrived, accompanied by transfer confirmation for the foundation payment. I forwarded the report to my financial advisors before opening a separate document included in the email, a preliminary proposal for a new development project titled Henderson Veterans Housing Initiative. The concept outlined was ambitious. A mixed-use development on Wells-owned property that would include affordable housing units specifically allocated for veterans and their families, on-site childcare facilities, and integrated support services. The proposal requested Reeves Capital's partnership for financing, with a significant percentage of ongoing revenue dedicated to the Richard Henderson Memorial Foundation. I stared at the document, recognizing it for what it was, Thomas Wells, extending an olive branch through the language and mechanisms he understood best. Not through emotional conversation or direct apology, but through concrete action and business collaboration that would honor his son while supporting the military community Richard had served. The proposal represented more than a real estate venture. It symbolized Thomas's attempt to align his strengths and resources with values his son had held dear. The man who had dismissed Richard's military service as a regrettable career choice was now seeking to create a lasting legacy supporting that very community. I typed a brief response. Preliminary concept has merit. Let's discuss details next. Sunday. 2 days later, Kate arrived with legal updates regarding the Foundation's first grant distributions. We sat at my kitchen table reviewing applications from military families, single parents serving active duty, families coping with injured veterans, widows and widowers like myself navigating life after service-related loss. The Wells Development contribution accelerates our timeline significantly, Kate noted. We can fund all 15 priority applications immediately instead of phasing them over 6 months. I nodded, studying a particularly compelling application. From a Marine Corps sergeant, a single mother of 3 preparing for deployment with limited family support for childcare. This is exactly the situation Richard worried about constantly. He would be pleased to know we're addressing it directly. Speaking of the Wells, Kate said carefully, have you considered how to handle their involvement with the Foundation? Long-term? Thomas has been calling me with ideas and suggestions almost daily. He seems quite invested in the operational details. That's surprising, I admitted. I would have expected him to make the required financial contributions without personal engagement. On the contrary, he's researching other veteran support organizations, suggesting potential partnerships, even offering Wells Development office space for Foundation headquarters. Kate raised an eyebrow. For someone who reportedly dismissed Richard's military career, he's becoming remarkably engaged with veteran causes. I considered this unexpected development. People reveal themselves differently through crisis. Perhaps losing Richard forced a reevaluation, and my illness and the custody situation brought that to a head. I sorted through the applications, focusing on the practical task at hand. As for Thomas's involvement, I think we cautiously encourage it. The Foundation benefits from his business expertise and connections. And the family dynamics? Kate pressed gently. 6 months ago, you were in court preventing these people from taking your children. Now you're considering a business partnership and Foundation collaboration. That's quite a transformation. I understood her concern. Kate had witnessed firsthand the pain the Wells had caused, the strategic battle required to protect my family. Her protective instincts as both friend and attorney naturally questioned this evolving relationship. It's not forgiveness exactly, I explained, searching for words to capture the complex emotional evolution. It's more like strategic peace. They have resources and capabilities that benefit my children and potentially many others. I have leverage to ensure those resources are deployed constructively rather than destructively. Military thinking. Applied to family dynamics, Kate observed with a small smile. It's the framework I understand, I acknowledged. Richard used to say his parents weren't bad people, just complicated ones shaped by their own upbringing and social expectations. He maintained relationship with them despite their disapproval of many of his choices. Including marrying you? Especially that, I confirmed wryly. But he always believed there was potential for change, particularly where the children were concerned. He just didn't live to see it realized. As Kate departed, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected reconfiguration of family relationships that had emerged from conflict. The custody battle, while painful and threatening, had ultimately forced a reckoning that might never have occurred otherwise. Thomas and Eleanor, confronted with the potential consequences of their actions, had been compelled to examine their behavior and priorities. The result wasn't perfect harmony, but rather a functional relationship built on clearer boundaries and mutual interests. That night, I opened my grandfather's letter again, finding wisdom I hadn't fully appreciated during the immediate crisis. True strategic thinking considers not just the battle, but the world that exists after victory. The most skilled commanders create conditions where former adversaries become productive allies, where conflict transforms into collaboration. This requires the strength to win decisively and the wisdom to be generous afterward. Samuel Reeves had understood something fundamental about power and its application, that true security came not from crushing opponents, but from transforming conflict dynamics entirely. By providing me the resources to defend my family, he had created conditions where reconciliation became possible from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. As I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. Thinking of you after today's treatment. The casserole in the blue container is Richard's favorite chicken dish. I thought the children might enjoy it tomorrow. Rest well. Such a simple message, yet remarkable in its acknowledgement of our shared connection to Richard and concern for both me and the children. Not a dramatic declaration of changed perspective, but a small, tangible demonstration of evolved priorities. I texted back, "Thank you." The basket was thoughtful and practical. The children are looking forward to Sunday dinner. These small exchanges, mundane in their content but significant in their intent, represented the gradual reconstruction of family bonds I had once believed permanently broken. My grandfather's trust had provided the defensive resources necessary to protect my children, but the path forward was being built through countless small interactions, each one laying foundation for a different kind of family structure than any of us had initially envisioned. As I walked into my final oncology appointment, Lily and James flanked me on either side. Thomas and Eleanor waited in the reception area, their presence a silent testament to our transformed family dynamic. My scan results confirmed what we'd hoped for: complete remission, my body victorious in its year-long battle. Later that evening, standing at the podium during the grand opening of the Henderson Veterans Housing Initiative, I surveyed the gathered crowd, military families, community leaders, and developers. My children sat in the front row beside their grandparents, pride evident in all their faces. When my husband died serving our country, I thought my greatest battles were behind me. I began. Cancer and a custody fight proved me wrong. But adversity reveals not just our enemies, but our unexpected allies. I nodded toward Thomas and Eleanor. This project represents what's possible when we transform conflict into collaboration. 26 military families now have affordable housing with integrated support services. The Richard Henderson Memorial Foundation has assisted over 200 families nationwide. My grandfather's trust hadn't just secured my children's future. It had created ripples of impact far beyond our immediate circumstances. The financial artillery he'd provided had initially been defensive, but ultimately became a force for reconstruction and healing. Life will ambush you with unimaginable challenges, I continued, my voice strengthening. Cancer, loss, betrayal. But with strategic thinking and the right resources, these very challenges can become the foundation for something more powerful than you ever imagined. The journey from military service through grief, illness, and family. Conflict had forged me into someone stronger than I'd believed possible. A warrior not just in uniform or against disease, but in the endless campaign for family, purpose, and legacy. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring journeys of resilience and strategic victory. Remember, your greatest power often emerges precisely when someone believes you're at your weakest. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting.